He's already announced me. I am a member of the Wheatland Historical Society, but I'm also a member of the Oregon-California Trails Association. And together, we're working on this project. And it was back in September of 2018 I got started in this whole thing. It was kind of a funny chance meeting with Francisco Paredes, the ranch manager out at the AKT Ranch. I was having breakfast in Chico with a bunch of retired friends that I do monthly, and I was coming back and I thought, I kept calling the phone number on the gate and I couldn't get permission to go out there. So I knew there were the historical sites out there, but the gate was open one day coming back from Chico. I thought, well, I'll drive in, and there was the office, had a car parked there, so I stopped in. It was Francisco, and he goes, I've been waiting for somebody to come here. And he wanted a trail marker out there from the Immigrant Trails West Association. And he had the books, and he had a certificate from OCTA back in 1988 when the Steeds were working out there on the project. And so I said, okay, I'll have to take it to the National Board for Trails West, and they voted on putting in a trail marker out there. And then I thought, I need some collaboration with the local community. So for some of you might remember I showed up about 3 years ago at one of your meetings, and I gave a short presentation on this whole project and got the support of the Wheatland Historical Society. And together, we've kind of moved forward. And I'll be honest with you, it's been Joe Wagerhauser and Bart Johnson and Tammy working together with me that have done a lot of the work. And I couldn't have met two nicer gentlemen, salt of the earth kind of people that I enjoy working with. And I've worked with a lot of associations and groups, and the Wheatland community is just so welcoming. It kind of encouraged me to keep going. So this has almost become a life project, it seems like. And all my friends, like Mike Schrock here, and I'm waiting for his wife Chris to come, are saying, boy, you've got a, my wife says, it seems like you're awfully engaged. Don't take on any more projects. Unfortunately, I say yes a lot. So I want to thank Bart and Joe, and as many of you know, Joe grew up on that ranch with his father, Bill Wagerhauser, who was the ranch manager. And it's so interesting to hear from Joe when we're out there, and he goes, I never knew all this stuff was out here the whole time I was living out here, if I'd have known. And the thing he regrets the most, of course, is not asking his father where that military camp was. But we have a pretty good idea where it was. And with that, I've got quite a few slides. If you need to get up, feel free. Let's see. There we go. These are all the trails that came into California. But what you need to know is the Truckee route of the California Immigrant Trail was the first trail into California for wagons. That doesn't mean mountain men and mules and horses, just the first wagon trail. So you have a lot to be proud of. I'll get it going. This is the entire trail, and I've traveled after I retired. I traveled from Independence, Missouri with a friend that I talked into going. He had no interest in trails, but he was willing to keep me company. And his son is my godson, and he's in Chicago, so we'd fly back to Chicago, and then we'd go to Independence, Missouri, rent a car, and we'd drive part of the way, maybe out to Fort Laramie the first year, and then we'd travel through. But this is Independence, Missouri, Fort Kearny, Chimney Rock, Fort Bridger. Just to give you a clue, Fort Bridger is the last building anybody traveling west in 1844 or 46 would see until they got to Johnson Ranch. That's 750 miles. And remember, they're traveling not in the United States. Where were they traveling to in 1844? Mexico. Okay, so they were going to a foreign country. Now, this is the famous, there's many parting of the ways, but this is the famous parting of the ways where the California Trail took off at Fort Hall and came into Wheatland. So that's where everybody split up. I'll get it right one of these days. Sorry for the small lettering, but I'll go over it with you. This is just kind of an orientation to the site out there. Here's the 1972 monument that the Wheatland Historical Society put in, and a tree. This is the Burtis Hotel site. This is the trail right here where it crosses the Bear River. The Bear River was right here in those days. And this is so obvious when you get into it. It's called a swale or depression where 100 wagons a day in 1849 were crossing the Bear Rivers. And that was documented by Lieutenant Derby, who was stationed at Camp Far West. And I just stuck a shovel and I ran my metal detector, found a good hit, and found a horseshoe in about 5 minutes. There's so much metal from wagon parts and mules and horses in there. This is a large oak tree, what's left of a large oak tree that was documented in those days. And this is the actual Johnson Ranch site. The adobe is over here. And this is me and a fire crew that I volunteered to come in that day and help us clean the cemetery. As payment to them, I gave them a history tour, so we were walking around. And my wife's son had a drone, and so he was taking pictures of us. And that's another shot of it there. That's the main trail coming down to the river crossing. And there's a well or a root cellar. I think it's more likely a root cellar. I actually found one identical to it in Nevada a couple weeks ago out north of Elko on another military fort called Fort Halleck. And there's an identical root cellar. It looks like a well, but it's rock lined and it's about 14 feet deep. It's almost exactly like this one. It's the same distance from the original Bear River. Burtis Hotel is there. And that's the swell looking from the river up. That's the well. A guy named Mr. Norris actually built this little wellhead here. Now it really wasn't a well, but he put a wellhead on it. That's kind of an overview. In the foreground, you can see the cemetery that's there. And then the Johnson Ranch is about 3/4 to a mile back here. And then the river crossing's right there. And the river used to run in this area before all the hydraulic mining up along Interstate 80 in that area. Just another panoramic shot. You can see the fire crew bus there, and that's the day we cleaned all the grass. We brought in cadaver dogs, and I'll go over that later when we get to the cemetery, but we had to clean all the grass so that the foxtails didn't get up their noses. We brought in 3 cadaver dogs. This is kind of an outline. This is the 1 square mile that Lieutenant Derby lined out as the military reservation. And the cemetery is right there. And we believe that the camp was right in here. That's the map that's on the wall in the back of the room. And this is the main trail coming down to the crossing. This is the cemetery, and this is a shortcut we found that the military was using from their camp up to the main trail. And then most likely, most of the immigrants ultimately in the military were traveling along the river there to Johnson's Ranch. Just to kind of, for orientation, that's all been annexed into the city of Wheatland. That's the ranch, and it's all been designated for housing in the future and development. And so the Johnson Dobian Ranch is here. You can see the trail, and then the cemetery and camp are right there. But that'll be a ways off. I thought I'd better cover a little history before we get into the what we've done and what we're going to do. Nissan villages were up and down the Bear River. I was talking to somebody here earlier, and that's quite well known. There's no documented villages in the lower part where Camp Far West or the Johnson Adobe were, but I'm sure they traveled up and down that area. I've always wondered about this, and I've got this documented, but when the trappers came here in the 1820s and 30s looking for beaver, they introduced a lot of disease to the Native Americans, and that pretty much killed them off. And that's why Sutter did not have much resistance when he started setting up in Sacramento, and the Johnsons. They were so decimated by all the diseases. And that's Kit Carson, and the reason I show him is he came here with Ewing Young before he was with Fremont in the 1830s. So he traveled through this area. When he was standing up on the ridge when he was with Fremont, he recognized Mount Diablo from when he traveled with Ewing, but he was part of the group that probably introduced disease. And you all know about Sutter coming here in the 1830s. Pablo Gutierrez worked for Sutter, and Pablo Gutierrez actually was the first person that had the land grant out here. It was actually called Rancho de Pablo, and but he didn't own it for very long. And I just threw this slide in this morning because a friend of mine that's an historian is working on Peter Lassen's project up by Vina. He had the Bancroft books, and he looked this up for me this morning. Oop. But if you look right here, Pablo was given the grant in 1844. He was in Sutter's employ, made plans with Bidwell to seek gold in Bear River, but Bidwell says he was captured and hanged by Castro in the Michael Turina campaign. Michael Turina was the Mexican governor in this area at the time. Sutter tells a similar story, but I never knew nothing further of the matter, and that was written by Bancroft. And if you're familiar with history, he's the authority. So the first wagon train comes down the Bear River through Rancho de Pablo, as it was known at that time, crossed the Bear River in the fall of 1844. That was the Stevens, Townsend, Murphy party. And then, this was in here before I had the other slide, but 1845, Gutierrez was hanged near Gilroy trying to deliver a message to the Mexican governor from Sutter. He actually had a secret message hidden in his boot. They found that and they hung him. And this is Elijah Stevens, also AKA Elijah Stevens, spelled a couple different ways. And if you've ever heard of Stevens Creek in Cupertino, that's who it's named after. He settled in Bakersfield, Kern County, and their Octa and state parks have a joint state historic landmark where he died, and it's number 732. Now, the Pioneer Cemetery, it says it started being used in 1844. Since I don't have any pictures of it being used then, I just took this from Frederick Dwayne's painting, but he clearly shows a few headstones. It's interesting, there's 4 of them there, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's on the Bear River right here, and it's on a slight knoll, a bench where it is today.
Where's that painting now? Do you know? Is it in the crock?
I know exactly where it is. It took me a while to find it, but it belongs to state parks, and it's in a warehouse in McClellan Air Force Base.
Oh, wow.
And it's about 30 inches by 4 feet. And I've been working with the curator down there to get to look at it in person. And because of COVID, I haven't had a chance. They won't allow me in there. But she sent me a digital copy of it that really allowed me to look at it much closer. I would like to eventually ask for it here for the Wheatland Historic Museum, or at least a digital copy of it. It really is the only evidence we have, you'll see before. So 1845-46, after Pablo perished, William Johnson and Sebastian Kaiser bought the land grant, 22,000 acres for $150. But you'll see a lot of these land grant folks, they were land rich and cash poor, so they quickly started selling it off or moving, just getting rid of it. Sutter acted as the agent for the Sutter Mexican government. They started working on a larger adobe building, and Johnson's Ranch was considered the western end of the California Trail. I just recently I have a handout. I think most of you got it. In 1845, Lansford Hastings, the famous Hastings cutoff that the Donner Party got stuck on. Well, he actually, Peter, who wrote the paper, had documented Hastings coming out on leaving on August 17th, 1845. Started out with 13 people and ended up with 10 here in starving condition, and then he pioneered the route backwards, and he actually got 200 wagons through successfully. The Donner Party just happened to be the last wagon train coming through, and we're a little late. But they actually crossed over the Sierras in December 23rd, a little before that, about a week before that. So the winter was late the previous winter. And I was hoping Tim Tweetmeyer was going to be here. Tim, you're not here, are you? Nope. The Donner Party, the Forlorn Hope snowshoers leave Donner Lake December 16th, 1846. Survivors arrive at Johnson's Ranch January 18th, 1847. All survivors stayed at Johnson's Ranch until their family members arrived. And you see in the diaries from Eliza Donner and others, the families were split. They would not leave Johnson's Ranch. And like none of us would if our family members are still up at Donner Lake. So they were waiting there for them to come back. All the relief parties, they got some supplies from Sutter, but they did a tremendous amount of supply for the relief parties at Johnson's Ranch itself, making jerky from beef and grinding flour. There's stories of them grinding, staying up all night long grinding flour. February 5th, the first relief leaves Johnson's Ranch and arrives on the 19th, that's led by Reese and Tucker. The second relief party was James Reed, who had been banished from the Donner Party for stabbing, if you know the story, Jake Snyder out in the middle of Nevada. I went to the site where he's buried, and we just found that a couple years ago with cadaver dogs. Octa worked on that project, and I took my GPS and I said, how far to Sacramento? It's like 400 miles. Wow. And he was banished with another gentleman joined him, but he had one horse between the two of them. They took turns riding it, and they made it 400 miles, and they were in starving condition when they arrived at, once again, Johnson's Ranch to get resupplied. But when you look back in history, they were fortunate that he was banished because he knew they were still coming along and must have been trapped. And he was a very influential person, well-connected, and so he was able to raise funds for the rescue. Next one. That's just a picture I threw in there. A lot of people don't know this, but in 1844, the entire Stevens Murphy party did not make it through, and a young gentleman named Schallenberger stayed with all the wagons that they couldn't get across in 1844, and he built the little hut here on the left, and that's was split in half by when the Donner Party reutilized it in 1846. And the ridge above Donner Lake to the south is called Schallenberger Ridge if you ever go through there. But he did a little better with hunting than the other folks. And this is just a painting of the relief party. This is William Eddy, first to arrive Johnson's Ranch as part of the Forlorn Hope group. And he actually recovers, and because his wife and child are up there, he's very anxious to get back to Donner Lake, and he leads the third relief party, but I won't put too much more in here. And then you should all know this one for your local history lesson. Marysville is named after Mary Murphy. Now, what does this character have to do with Johnson's Ranch? General Stephen Watts Kearny in the Army of the West. Anybody know their California history? You can help me out. By the way, I'm not an expert on history. I'm not a professor. I'm not a PhD. I'm just a guy that's interested. I worked in a whole different field for most of my life, but I've always had an interest in history, and this one just kind of fell into my lap and I got into it. And this, Stephen Watts Kearny led the Army of the West. This was in Mexico. The president at the time was President Polk. Polk wanted to unify both coasts, and the only way to do that was put his army to work. So they left Fort Leavenworth, Kansas in May of 1845, and my wife and I were at Vance Old Fort on the Arkansas River. The Arkansas River was the distinguishing southern border of the United States at that time. So when they left Vance Fort, they were in Mexico. And they moved to Las Vegas, not the Las Vegas, Nevada, but Las Vegas, what is now New Mexico, where they filmed the TV show, the series. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And basically he stood on a roof, the general stood on a rooftop and said, "You're all in the United States," and a shot was never fired, and they basically took all that area of New Mexico, what is now New Mexico, from Mexico. And he decided to move, he was directed to move west to California, and he ran into Kit Carson and Lieutenant Beale, which has a local interest, who were traveling east to see President Polk. Kit Carson was with Fremont, and they had had several skirmishes with the Mexican government, and they thought they had finished what needed to be done to bring California into Mexico into California. But the Mexicans came back, and Kit Carson was sent with letters to go to Polk, directly to Polk with Beale. So Kearny meets him in the southern United States, and Kearny says, "You're coming with me. You know how to get back to California." Kearny had no idea where he was going, and so Carson actually lived in that area and was hoping to see his wife, but that didn't work out. So Kit Carson and Beale started heading west with the Army of the West. And they came into San Diego and are met by who? Well, none other than Andre Pico and his army of vaqueros with spears. And that was the battle that was going to be a decisive battle whether California stayed in Mexico or came into the United States. And we lost the initial skirmish. Poor Kearny and his mules and soldiers had traveled almost 2,000 miles. By the time they got to San Diego, they were done for. They were exhausted. Well, Andre Pico, which is the brother of Pio Pico, if you know anything about Spanish land grants, Pio Pico ended up being a state senator in California, yada, yada, yada. They were fresh, and they knew how to use spears off horses really well, and they killed a bunch of Americans, U.S. soldiers, and they actually lost the battle. We lost it. Kearny did. And they were held on this Mule Hill. I originally had a picture of it. I've taken what the military calls a staff ride of the Battle of San Pasqual. And I sat on Mule Hill and thought about poor Kearny. He had been stabbed with a lance. But they were surrounded by the Mexican army, and they couldn't move. So Kit Carson and Lieutenant Edward Beale, a Navy lieutenant, mind you, even though Air Force Base is named after just thought I'd point that out to you. Kearny is injured and his army is surrounded by the Mexicans on Mule Hill, and they have to sneak through the Mexican lines with no shoes and that pear cactus, if you've ever been down to San Diego, for 30 miles. And they split up and go through. There's three of them. There's a Native American, Beale, and Kit Carson. And they have to reach the Marines who are floating offshore in ships to go back and rescue Kearny, which they do successfully. And they all three are able to make contact with the U.S. military or the Navy. And so that's why California is in the United States. It's a short story. He wins the Battle of San Pasqual and moves to Monterey, declares he is the governor of California. Well, after several other battles, I was trying to boil this down. Admiral Stockton, or Commodore Stockton, sails off and says, "Hey, bye Fremont, you're the governor, see you later, gotta go." Well, Kearny outranks Fremont, but Fremont will not acquiesce to his role as governor. And Kearny says, "All right, I'll give you one more chance. And you're not the governor, I am. I'm a general, I outrank you." And Fremont resists. He said, "I am not giving up the governorship. Stockton told me I was the governor." And he says, "Fine, you're under arrest for mutiny." Kearny heads back to Fort Leavenworth spring of 1847, taking Fremont with him under arrest for mutiny. And that's something you don't read much in the history books. And they stay at Johnson's Ranch. And as tradition, if you're under arrest, you're the last horse in the parade. So you might have 80 soldiers and you're in that dust cloud in the back under arrest. As they pass over the Sierras, they come through the Donner camp at Donner Lake, piled everything up at the main camp, and burned it. I'm pretty sure they weren't aware that the Donner camp was 5 miles away. If you've ever been up Highway 89 north of Truckee, it's a beautiful hike, by the way, to their campsite. So they were there. So Kearny now is heading to Leavenworth. And there's Pathfinder John C. Fremont that we know him. He camps at Johnson's Ranch several times. Is everybody aware of the monument that's out on the south side of Sutter Buttes? That was one of his camp spots. He was convicted in the court-martial, but he was never punished. Anybody know why? It goes to who he was married to. Jessie Benton. Jessie Benton is the daughter of Senator Benton, the most powerful congressman at that time in the U.S. Senate. And you have to remember that Fremont was actually secretly sent. It was supposed to be a topographical mission, but he really was a military force, and he had a howitzer with him, and everybody was well armed and so forth. His father-in-law sent him on that original mission, so his father-in-law saved him when he got into trouble with Kearny. So he got tried at a court-martial, but he was never punished. He actually was an officer in the the war in the 1860s. Okay, so end of the Mexican-American War, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo on 2248. California became part of the U.S. 1848, Marshall discovers gold in Coloma, which 1849. We need a fort to keep the Indians. They thought they would have trouble with the Native Americans here and separating them from the miners and basically keeping the peace. And so that's old Captain Hannibal Day. And I think this picture must have been taken after the Civil War because he was in the Civil War. But he looks beat. He's 2nd Infantry, Company E&F. Why was Camp Far West placed where it was? So let's talk about why did it end up out here in Wheatland? Why would you put one of the first military camps on the West Coast was right here outside of Wheatland? Why would you put it here?
It's a direct line.
Direct line. You're right on the Immigrant Trail. What's good about the Bear River?
It's water.
You got gold in it, so the soldiers can work on their days off, maybe make a little pocket change. What about the water? Nobody's getting sick from the water in the Bear River. They are getting sick from water in the Yuba and the Feather Rivers because of the mining going on. So they had tested and gotten reports from folks using the water. And then what about the location? Hi, Chris. What about the location to the Johnson Ranch? Well, we got beef, we got vegetables, and so I can get my supplies right there. But they were a little short of some other things. In the first year, four soldiers died. Private Baldwin, 1850, Private Barney, 1850, Eckweller, 49, and Stevenson, 49. And they're supposedly buried in the cemetery out here. I would like to find proof of that, but we haven't got it yet. And this guy is quite a character in history. Lieutenant George Horatio Derby, topographical engineer. Kind of a handsome devil, isn't he? West Point graduate, laid out Camp Far West, toured the north, and made great maps, really well done maps. Unfortunately for him, and it's fun to read his stories, he's quite a creative writer, but all his sextants and engineering tools are on these covered an old wagon, and driving back and forth, they're just all beat to heck. And the latitudes and longitudes he lists in there don't line up with anything. And he admits it. He goes, "Don't trust my stuff because it's all beat up." One funny story is he's taking a wagon back to Benicia, which is their military headquarters, and Captain Day told him, "Don't go across the what we know is the Yolo Bypass." He goes, "You'll sink in the mud out there. It's starting to be the wet time of the year." Well, Derby tries it anyway. He buries that thing. And so he gets back, and Captain Day says, "That's fine. In the spring, you'll be digging it out." And he actually had to go back, dig out the wagon, and give it back. But he laid everything out. And then,
Question?
yes.
Do we know whether this George Derby is related to the Derbys of this area?
I don't know. I doubt it. He's an East Coaster.
He's not related.
There you go.
Do we know that already? Yeah, she said.
But what's interesting of Brough, he must have been well known. If you know James Goldsboro Brough, he's the premier diarist and pencil painter, a pioneer that came out in 1849. He took the Lassen route, and he was a topographical engineer from Washington, D.C., and he mentions Derby in his book, which is about this thick. So there's the camp that he laid out, the 1 square mile. They moved, originally he secured 200 yards on the south side of Bear River, and then Captain Day said, "No, the land's good down there, I want a 1/4 mile," so they shifted it down. His drawing's pretty accurate. A friend of mine's a surveyor, and I gave him the written narrative information that Derby left, and to see if we were accurate about the way we laid it out on the current maps, and he said, "Well, he didn't leave you enough information, but it's pretty close." So there's the Frederick Dwayne painting. I originally dismissed this as evidence for where the camp was, because I looked him up in Ancestry.com, and he died in an insane asylum in Stockton much later in time. As he was well past the post time, I thought, he's just some nutcase that painted the camp. Well, and I kind of dismissed him until I talked to the curator at State Parks. He goes, "Oh, you got to know the history." he was born at the fort after it was closed. And his father was a military person and came here 2 years after it was closed, and he lived out there, and he ran a wood shop out there. So Bart and Joe and I go back out there and we go, we need to look at this again. And we held up a photocopy, and that ridge line, this ridge line here, and this one here where the cemetery are perfectly lined up. They are if you just took them and you look at it and you look at a map, it's almost fits perfectly in there. We just kind of went, oh, I guess he did know what he was talking about. So you got to dismiss evidence. Be careful about dismissing that kind of information. Now, I mentioned this person because Dr. Robert, this was his first assignment as a military doctor, was Camp Far West. He went on to be the Surgeon General of the United States. I'm trying to get his records. He must have kept diaries and maps and information, but I haven't been able to get a hold of anything yet. But most of the military doctors are pretty good diarists, but I haven't gotten this. This is one of the things about doing this project is I learned about post returns. On military forts, they have to basically send, like a lot of anything government, you got to send in a report once a month. Well, they call them post returns, and this is the first post return of September 1849. I'll give you a close up. There's the one that kind of interested me was the one under deaths. Can you read that back? That says deaths up there. They've already got 2 there, and that's their first month. Yeah, so I don't want to spoil the surprise here, but I also have a complete set of Captain Day's letter book. His family donated this, and so it's online, and I downloaded it, and I just downloaded a few kind of interesting pieces. This is November 16th, 1849. No matter how bad things are, he starts off his letters with, he always starts it off the same way. I have the honor to forward a semi-monthly field return of a battalion of 2nd Infantry. It's always an honor. Then he gets into his griping. We hear nothing yet of lumber from below, and 4 deaths already within this month would seem to verify the prediction of Assistant Surgeon Murray of last August, unless by possibility we can shelter ourselves from the winter rains. So he's starting to say, hey, we don't have any shelter, it's raining here and we're dying. If by any possibility this command should not be kept here beyond, say, the 20th of December, the supplies herein referred to in red will not be needed. Say a small supply of vinegar, and would add very much to our baggage as well as the expense of transportation. The important part is, I mentioned this subject barely to save trouble and expense. Hey, just bring us back in and we'll save you a lot of money. Without any official reason for supposing that we have been located here on an experimental or temporary excursion, but it having been so positively asserted by officers of the, I can't read it, in this territory that 2 were not to remain here during the winter. He was told it was temporary, they wouldn't have to stay all winter. So he's going, hey, there's no shelter, people are dying. You want us to really stay out here? And the Bear River swells up so bad, there's no dams on those days. They can't travel by wagon up and down. They have to wait for a boat from Nicholas, basically where Nicholas is, to bring the stuff up by boat. I mean little boats, rowboat kind of thing. And this is the last post return, and before they move on. And this one is kind of interesting. That's I circled it. Now they updated the form, as any good government would. This has changed from deaths to died. And you can die ordinarily or killed in action or wounded. But the desertions, they're up to 9.
Wow.
And they need 44 replacements. They get down to where they have about 10 soldiers left on the fort, and they couldn't chase a bad guy if they had to. And Captain Dave basically says that in his letter. So they closed in 1852, not enough conflict to justify keeping the camp. There was no conflict. And there's, of course, I'll show you the sale ad in the paper. So the 2nd Infantry Company's ENF moved to Cow Creek in Shasta County, and it becomes Fort Reading. And there's some historians that have found the foundations for those buildings, which kind of helped us out. But there's the Daily Union, April 24th, 1852 in Sacramento, and there's the sale ad. There's Camp Far West, 1 mile from Johnson's Ranch on Bear Creek. They call it Bear Creek. Saturday, May 1st, 1852. So it was in the newspaper. And it's like pounds of pork and all kinds of weird stuff. Molasses, lime juice. I don't know if they got their vinegar. Probably took their vinegar with them, I guess. What would they want vinegar? I really don't know. What would they want vinegar so bad for?
Keeping food safe.
Pickling
Oh,
or
that's
canning.
right, pickling. Oh, that would make sense. Okay.
And for those.
So they basically moved from here in the Wheatland area up to Reading on Cow Creek. And once again, they put their camp very close to the creek, and it flooded during the winter. This is just a little, this is the original Camp Beale, as it was during World War II, and this is the Beale Air Force Base as it exists today. So you can see they took a lot of land. I have a friend that his family had a ranch over here off Garden Bar Road. I think it was his grandfather was extremely angry his whole life that the government took his land and never got it back. He still lives over there. Okay, the trail, the last 2 miles of the 2,000-mile immigrant trail is on the AKT Ranch, and it's from Independence, Missouri to Wheatland. And there's the map again. So it all ends here. Now this is something I found in my research. This is a 1947 aerial photograph of your community, and the immigrant trail is very evident on here. And this shortcut from the military camp, which is the cemetery area. And somebody else asked me about Camp Beale. See these two areas right here? You see all the streets? That's right along Camp Far West Road. And if you keep your eye open, you'll see those dirt roads. Those were military buildings out there. For some of you folks probably remember that. Barton remembers it, and he showed it to us the other day. But that was regular military station there, but they also used it when the war ended to muster out soldiers. And then this was done by a gentleman named Don Buck. He's our premier trail historian. He's in his 90s now, and he had drawn the trail on here many years ago, and it's proven. We just walked, Bart and Joe and I just did the section last week that goes across the bottom of the lake and verified it. And but he had drawn that on a topo map. You'll also notice this T70. That's a trail marker, and it's right on Camp Far West on a curve, and if you didn't know where it was, you'd never notice it. I'll show you more of that in a minute. But there was one, T71, on the AKT Ranch, previous ownership before Angelo Tokopoulos. But the previous owner had Octa remove it, or Immigrant Trails West remove it. That's what Francisco wanted back. That's the start of this whole thing. They wanted that trail marker back. And that's what T70 says today. And these are from diaries, and I'll show you some more in a minute. This was written by John A. Johnson, no relationship to Johnson Ranch. Are now a mile and a half from the Johnsons, the first settlement in California on this route. So that on reaching Johnson's, we count our journey finished and its hazards ended. That is the overland trip to California, John A. Johnson, August 14th, 1849. I drag my friends out once a year to all these trail markers, Chris and Mike. Part two, what work had been done previous to our project? Okay, so the obelisk in the cemetery, the native sons and daughters of the Golden West placed this in 1911. And you can see all the plates are gone. There's also this tree that it magically disappeared. It was cut down. We don't know by who or when. We're not sure exactly when it was installed, but you see this little trail marker right here? It's half grown out of it. It says trail on it. And we thought it had been stolen, burned up, disappeared. Maybe some ranch hands got it, didn't know what it was, and it just lost forever. More on that in a minute. Camp Far West Cemetery, this is 1911. This is the obelisk. Before there's a wall around it, there's the obelisk. See all this white stone back here? That's all the tailings from the doodlebugs. And then in 1948, I get my centuries mixed up, the sons and daughters and Horst throws in $500, and they use county convict labor, and they build the wall. It's kind of interesting when I look. It's a really bad picture, but it's all I could get from this. The daughters of the Golden West have been extremely helpful to me in gathering information. The sons not so much, but the daughters kept pretty good records, and they sent me this deteriorated photograph. But that's what it says on the right in the notes is Camp Far West Cemetery after restoration. What I don't see in it is the opening in the wall, which should be right here, but it's a solid wall. So I don't know if they built it and then decided to put in the gate or what, but that was 1948. And then that's the obelisk, and this is, the plates had already been stolen, but a General Weaver from Camp Beale. Now remember, Camp Beale included the military site during World War II before it shrunk to Beale Air Force Base. So a General Weaver paid to have one more plate, one of these, made to put back on the obelisk. And there's the dedication in 1950 of the Native Sons and Daughters of the Golden West at the cemetery. Kind of cool old picture. I like the way everybody dressed in those days. They had formal hats and wore their suits out there. If you've been out there, see that is, I think that was May. So that wouldn't be too bad out there in May. Gets pretty hot out there in the summertime. I took a national park person out there this last August. She was just happened to be in town and she's never been there. Her and her husband were on vacation. They said, "Can you take us out there?" I said, she goes, "We'll be there 11 o'clock. I said, "Yeah, I'd be about 110 by then." She goes, "Oh, we'll come at 9. So I had an older gentleman with me that couldn't walk, so I left him in my car with the air conditioner on, and I walked him to the cemetery. When I got back, it was 121 degrees on my little Toyota. This is what it says on the, this is the 1972 monument that the Wheatland Historical Society put up, you guys. And that's what it says on top, because you can't read it, I typed it out for you. Donner Immigrant Trail, River Crossing, 1844 to 1878, erected by the Wheatland Historical Society in 1972. So that's pretty good deal they put that there, because that tree was right next to it. The stump's still there, and Joe and Bart and I have argued over whether that's the tree stump or not the right tree stump, but we think it is now. One of the things that I found I plugged into the PowerPoint program was this dedication in October 23rd, 1976. There's three dedications going on, but this bottom one is the Johnson Crossing. And there was somebody in your community that was heavily involved in this. There was a big movement in the early 70s to put up the immigrant trail markers. And there's one on Highway 49 at Wolf Creek Crossing, and there's a couple more, but this one was put in all at the same time. And the guy that's really behind it was Wendell Roby and a guy named Bert Johnson. Anyway, this is an announcement of the dedication of him on October 23rd, 1976. That's the program. You can't read it, but there's your Mary M. Griffith. The community really owes a lot to her for storing the information. She was on this statewide committee to put in those monuments back in the early 70s, and she got the Steeds the information they needed for their book. So if anybody knows any more or has any more information from Miriam, I know the Steeds got a lot to do their book. I haven't seen any other than what was in the book, but that'd be great. But the community owes a lot to Miriam for what she got going. And of course, the Steeds did the research book in 1988. There's Jack and Richard and Miriam in the middle.
Bill,
Yes.
there may be some people here who aren't familiar with the Steeds.
Oh, okay.
Tell a little bit about who the Steeds are.
Yeah. This is the only book written. And by the way, these are all the books beyond what you have in the back that are part of my research box. And I'll talk about the master's student. But the Steeds, Jack Steed was a friend of Bill Wagerhauser, I think. Help me out, Joe, if I get this wrong. They went to high school together. And so Jack and his son were amateur historians like me, and they were out looking for the Johnson Ranch. And nobody had ever known where the river crossing or the adobe was. And so because Bill Wagerhauser allowed them out here, they eventually found it. They found what they believed was the adobe. And eventually, when they got done with a couple years of doing all the research, they eventually wrote a book. And you guys, if you live in this community, you should have this book. It's a great resource, and as you can see by all my post-it notes, I use it quite often. And I'll show you some of the stuff that they.
Does anybody remember when the Steeds came, probably 50 years ago, and did a presentation, I think in this building? And they had a bunch of stuff that they'd excavated that they had laid out on the table. And
Look
that's
like
been
that?
A long time ago.
Like that. This is all from the book. These are things that they found either in the Johnson Adobe site or on the trail. Now they didn't do any work out at Camp Far West, nor did they just didn't, I think they ran out of energy and time from reading the book. Jack was in a memory care facility when I started this project, and I talked to his wife and his son, Richard, but he's since passed away. The son and I had several conversations on email as well as on the phone, but that trail ran cold, I'll just say that. And all this stuff you're talking about, they still have. So I just showing you pictures of it. You can see some of his dinnerware. That's probably around the Johnson Adobe. Kerosene lamp, some mercury in those dishes above. That's kind of cool. You can see that little arrowhead thing, handmade, hand-forged buckle of some sort. So they also worked with a guy named Knorr from Yuba City. Did anybody know Mr. Dorn? So he found a lot of items, but for some reason when he passed away, he left them with the Forgotten Warriors Museum out at Beale. And there'll be some pictures here of that. He says he found some items at what was Camp Far West, but like most people, they collect things, they never keep a map of where they found them. And if I tell you one, don't collect things if you're not going to do something with them. If they're going to end up in your garage or junk drawer, particularly because archaeologists are trying to, or even amateurs like myself, you go find that stuff, we rebury everything. Joe and Bart and I have found tons of stuff in the Octa volunteers. We have kept zero of it because there's no need to. I take a picture of it, we GPS it, we stick it back in the ground, unless Francisco or Angela wants it. And there's a few pieces. So he found a lot of items, but unfortunately he didn't leave a map, and all the stuff's out of the other one. That's a picture of him in the well, which I say is not a well. It's like a root cellar is what it is down there. And that's a project for the future. This is his display out at the museum. None of that stuff came from the camp. This is just stuff he collected. That's the only thing he put in a shadow box. And Joe and Bart and I have found tons of this, nails. This is an old shovel handle, a knife. I found tons of these. I don't know that they're related to, and I think those are the mining things. This is a trigger guard for a rifle or a pistol. This is a chain link. This may be a powder horn. I think that's what it is. He mentions that in the book, but you can see it out there if you want. But it really doesn't do any good if you don't know where it came from. This one, this is his other stuff he collected. This one here, I just question, what do you think that looks like? For those that can see it. Cross link on a pair of snow chains. That's what it looks like to me. Anyway.
How big is it?
Pardon me.
How big is that chain?
Oh, I didn't measure it. So the other thing that happened during the same period is Octa got involved, and they actually hired an archaeologist, Jonathan Horn. I contacted him and his company. They're in Colorado now. He shared everything he had with me, all his archaeological pictures, the maps. We talked on the phone. He's been extremely helpful, and he's actually the one. Before I forget, he's actually the one that registered the Burtis Hotel and the Johnson Ranch as National Historic Places. So those are registered. So that's really the last activity that was done out there on the ranch. They wouldn't allow anybody on that ranch after that, previous owners. Until I ran into Francisco, nothing, and help from the Wheatland Historical Society, nobody was out there. So, in 1988. Immigrant Trails West, they've got 700 of these railroad iron T-posts across Nevada and California. And you can, if you like to go hunt for those, they're a lot of fun. You can buy their books, they're on the internet. I'll have these up here afterwards so you can look up. This is just the trucking trail. I have a stack of these at home for all the different trails. Some do, they like to travel on dirt roads. This is the second to the last one. So this is with practically no food for man or beast, and by bringing all the energy and courage which both men and beasts possess, we succeeded in reaching the first, or Johnson's settlement, Benjamin Hoffman, September 1st, 1849. Those are always kind of fun to read. Anyway, this is T70, which we went over. It's sitting right off Camp Far West Road on a curve. It's kind of in a bad spot. And they line them up so the top of the T-post is parallel with the trail. So when you see them, you gotta look right or left or the right and go right down the trail. That's actually, that's Joe here. He's sitting right in the swale and Bart. And T71 was right about there. I found the hole that they put it in and took it out of. And we hope to put it back there someday. And so you're looking off to the east to the Sierras. 2005, a draft EIR for the city of Wheatland was done, and that's where all this information about the development in the future. So what have we done since 9/21/2018? That's when I started this whole crazy thing. And who is we? The Oregon California Trails Association and the Wheatland Historical Society. Bart, Joe, myself, and others have worked on this quite a bit. Who do we work with? Francisco, Julie Hansen, she's the lead developer for the AKT Development Corporation, and actually Angelo himself. And he's been quite accommodating and let us do what we wanted to do. We hope it continues. What we accomplished, let's find out. We developed a plan with objectives, and we've kept to it, and it's not super detailed, but we've met a lot of the stuff. Originally, Angelo asked us to design a public access road and parking lot with a looped hiking trail, so we did that. The public access would run down the east side of the property line to a parking lot near the cemetery, and then you have a loop trail that goes over the Johnson Ranch and then back to the trail, and then back down to your car. So we have an estimated cost for that, and Angelo has a lobbyist back in Washington, D.C., trying to find some funding for that. So it's about $700,000 to put in that road. And that was an old estimate. That's 3 years old now. We have put up, there were no signs out there, so first thing we had to do is find out where everything was. And I made the signs, and Bart supplied the eucalyptus logs, and we at least started marking things. So that's the river crossing. That's actually a Carsonite flag post from Oregon California Trails Association. We put 4 of those along the trail. That's Dick Wall, the past vice president of the Octa Association. This is the Johnson family at the Johnson site. I thought it was pretty cool. The Johnsons at the Johnson. So you recognize everybody there. And the T-posts used to protect the trail and other historic sites. We had 24 hours notice to put posts on both sides of the trail because they were going to disc the fields. So Joe and Bart and I and Dick and the grandkids, we originally went out there with wood stakes, and you can see one of them in the background. And we thought somebody was messing with us a little bit because they're all knocked down the next day. Well, we found the cows would eat the flagging, and they knocked all the posts over. So we had to go get some T-posts, and we had to go back out there and mark them again. Only the T-posts held up. So this last spring, one of the projects on the plan was we really had to find evidence of the trail. So we had 3 or 4 work parties with about 25 volunteers from Octa and Wheatland Historical Society and Immigrant Trails West, and we found 360 objects on 2 miles of the trail, and oxen shoes and horseshoes and wagon parts and chain links and anything you can imagine. And those are all recorded, all back in the ground. But here, I'll show you some. Now this is interesting. It has nothing to do with verifying it as an immigrant trail, but this is actually in Francisco's office. That's a 1927 chauffeur's badge.
Wow.
Issued from the state of California. and it was laying in the trail. I don't know how it got there, but somebody, probably the Wilson Cattle Ranch, maybe some cowboy lost it off his shirt. I think in the past, to drive a taxi or you had to have a chauffeur's license, and that was a badge you had. We found horseshoes. That's a bullet on my archaeologist hammer, a key, a hand-forged nail. That thing on the left is it hooks to the tongue on the wagon and hooks the wagon tongue to the wagon. And that's in Francisco's office. Another horseshoe on the bottom there. And the lower right is a nut, and then this is a leather buckle. There's a chain link down in here, there, another nut. Just showing you some examples. And then the cemetery, if you look at Google Earth, you can easily find this cemetery. If any of you have looked, it's really, and that's off the 1947 aerial photograph. And you can see all the hydraulic mining that was done that tore everything up. We brought three cadaver dogs out, from Butte County, and they each separately were sent around by their owners, handlers, and we found 18 corpses, and that's one of the ways that we marked them. You can see the obelisk in the center, and then that's the archaeologist map, and the blue is surface grave features. People have put rocks down to look like they're grave sites, but they're not. And they probably just got confused and didn't really know where they were. The green are where the actual bodies are. And you can see some of them are outside the boundary. This is the entrance right here. If you stand at the entrance, there's a body right there. Bart made some nice crosses, and we put those in the ground, marking each one so we wouldn't have to re-find them. I had a volunteer for one trip that came out with ground penetrating radar, and we looked at a couple of them, and I was able to look through the screen. They're not buried very deep, but you can tell the length they are. They look like a big gray cigar, and you can see so you can tell if they're adult or a child, and they're not buried very deep, and you can tell with the ground penetrating radar, but he never came back out again. So, but PG&E did. I happen to know from where I used to work, somebody that worked for PG&E high up, and they sent a boom truck out, and Bart bought the pulley, and they put the new pulley on the flagpole, and then they actually painted it for us. And he offered to come back out anytime we needed it fixed. So that was really nice of the boom truck driver. And so now the flag's work. And so I bought the American flag that flew over the nation's capital. And then the bottom one is still the current flag for the 2nd Infantry. And those are Bart's. Is that all your grandchildren? And three of them. So then the state flag. And so that's kind of fun. There's the one cross that's right there at the entrance. Bart had the gates left over and went out and hung them one day. And I think I'll cover this, but if I don't. This rock pillar, when we first got there, it was vandals had pushed it over. It was all busted up. Angelo Tokopoulos actually paid a rock mason, like in August, to come out there in the blazing sun and put that all back together. And so it's all cleaned up. There's only one grave we feel confident, Betsy Parker. And her grave is, you can see, if the grass were cut, you'd see a clean line of red bricks. It talks about it being lined in red brick, and it's in one corner of the cemetery. So we felt fairly confident, so I made a sign for her and marked her grave. Now, if it changes in the future, we can change it. But we need to replace the stolen panels on the obelisk and help me out, Bart, the group that volunteered to pay for the clampers. Francisco would like just to at least replace the plot. He doesn't want a new monument. That's where we started. Maybe a second monument somewhere, but he just wants the plates replaced. So we still have that to do. The cemetery is done for now. It would be nice to have a flag ceremony sometime. That's for you guys to the Wheatland Historical Society. But when COVID sort of passes, maybe on Veterans Day or July 4th or something, we could go out there and do something. So, yeah, interpretive panels. I was hoping Morgan Braun would be here. She's not here. we got to a point in the plan where I couldn't do any more, and we need interpretive panels out there, National Park Service type interpretive panels. So I called Sacramento State University, and they said, yeah, we'll help you. And so they gave me a master's student, Morgan. She lives in Winters, and she completed her thesis in August, and I'm still waiting to hear from her about the interpretive panels. So I'll be presenting that to the Wheatland Historical Society for your consideration down the road. I want to see what she came up with for interpretive panels, but we need to go from the wood signs to nice metal wood sign or metal signs. So where was the camp? That's the cemetery looking south towards the Bear River. We feel it was there, and spread out between. And we've used various things to come up with that. The Von Schmidt maps. Dee Owens, who's a premier map person with Okta, she's able to take several maps and georeference them about 5 different data points on each map. She can take an old map with a new map, and every time she did that, she came up with one place, and it was right there, right close to the river. And a high point is, and you don't notice it when you're driving on the backside of the orchard, but there's kind of a high point over here. The other thing I used is I looked at camp reading, and I tried to figure out how many acres they needed. This just shows the buildings for the people, but if you have 80 to 90 horses and mules, where are you going to put them? Downstream. And the reason the fort's so close to the river, they don't have pumps back in those days, so you have to walk down to the river, get your water and haul it back up. And you want the horses downstream. So I measured Fort Reading, and it's about 25 acres is what they utilize. And that's about, when you add in this piece down here, it all matches. Now it might be squeezed over here a little more. Joe and I and Bart are gonna play around out here with some metal detecting. There's a couple little strips of undisturbed soil. We think we may be able to find something, but the painting is probably the best evidence we have, and it just fits in there perfectly. So that's where we're going to call it. There's the painting again. We've already covered that. I didn't know it. My wife's an artist. She picked up on this right away. She goes, that's the Bear River. And I didn't even notice it in the painting, but it is. And then there's the cemetery right on the knob. So it might be over just a little bit closer to the cemetery. In the narrative, in Captain Day's letters, he talks about the day they pull out of there to go to Fort Reading. We passed by the cemetery and said goodbye to our fellow soldiers. Well, so he had to be on the other side of the cemetery to pass by it to say goodbye to the soldiers on their way on the shortcut. So, and there had to be roads leading to it. So when we found the shortcut trail to the cemetery coming down and the other one from the main trail, the Pioneer diaries, which I have, there aren't too many that mention the camp, but the few that do say, we felt so comfortable when we finally saw the American flag at Camp Far West. Well, you can't see the camp from the way up on the ridge at the main trail, so it tells me they had a shortcut that came down along the river. And if you ever dealt with oxen or mules or horses, they have to be fed and watered a lot to keep moving. So if you're a pioneer, you're not going to stay up on that hot ridge line in September, October. You're going to immediately drop to the Bear River and get your oxen, mules, and horses taken care of. And Bart and I were out there one day, and we were poking around that casement area, and I had a shovel with me and my rattlesnake beater backer thing, and I moved some berry vines back, and I found, I went right back, flipped, I found it. I hit Bart and I said, Bart, look at this. And the Steeds, I think, had it there for display next to the casement, because they used to bring people out there and give them history tours. It had been sitting there, and the berry bushes all grew over it, and people lost track of it. It was full of red ants. And so we went back to Bart's house and got some plastic bags and ant dust and threw the stump in there and let it sit for a couple of weeks out in the hot sun, and the ants were dead. And then Bart kindly mounted it on a piece of plywood with a backing on it. And that's Francisco and Bart and Joe. And so his collection of artifacts is starting to grow in his office, and we tell him we're going to make that our museum, and he has to find someplace else. He's been really helpful out there. I'm just going to go over the Forlorn Hope endurance runners real quickly. Bob Crowley, I was hoping Tim would be here today. 4 of them ran last year on the Forlorn Hope trails, 100 miles in 5 days. They covered on snowshoes and running, and they ended up at the Johnson Ranch, and that's it was quite a feat. And Angelo challenged him when they finished. He let them end here on the real Johnson Ranch, and we had a campfire. I'll show you. And that's their trail, but that's them coming in. Tim's the real tall guy, and Angelo said, "Well, I think you need to run the first relief party backwards." And so he kind of challenged him, and they're going to do it. So February 14th, they're planning on leaving Johnson Ranch, and we'll of course let everybody know. But and they'll set off. They hope to set off on mules, and then at Mule Springs they'll switch over to running and snowshoeing, depending on the winter. And they'll end up at Donner Memorial State Park on the exact date that the first relief party showed up. These guys, they're incredible. When I first met Bob, I thought they're going to be young guys. And I said, "You're as old as me." And Bob's right there, and then Tim's in the back, Jennifer and Elke. Thank you. They didn't even look tired when they came in. It was so. They each carried certain photographs of members of the Forlorn Hope, and it was a very somber occasion. Nobody spoke, and they came in one at a time and quietly laid the photographs of the ones they carried at the post for the Johnson Adobe. And then there was a history. Bob spoke for a while, and then a gentleman from the Donner Summit Historical Society, and then I spoke for you guys. And that's them, and we had a little campfire and a bucket thing, and we sat around and talked about their experience. But they basically did 20 miles a day, but they had a big support crew. They had a sport van, but they camped in tents, and it was cold. And they crossed the Middle Fork and the American River with no special clothing, just their running clothes, and they went below Colfax is where they crossed the North Fork and the American and came out there.
That was in December, right?
That was December. Yeah, it's taken them a long. They've studied this for 7 years, and Bob and I have coined what they do as history trekking, and we're trying to get young folks kind of caught up in history. These guys are caught up in history like you wouldn't believe. They're constantly pinging me for more information, getting ready to do. I said, "You're past me." I said, "I'm the student now. You're the professor. You keep going." But I'm helping to find places to camp on the way back to Donner Memorial State Park. But they're definitely going to do it. They're very dedicated people. It's interesting is where history crosses. Wendell Roby was the big power pusher on the Western States Trail, the run. You've all heard of the 100-mile run. Well, Wendell Roby was the big pusher on the immigrant trails as well, because his vision was to convert it to hiking horse equestrian use. And in 1949, the state legislature actually entertained the idea, and Wendell put it forward to own the immigrant trail from Donner Memorial State Park to Chicago Park on Highway 174 down the canyon below Colfax. They were hoping to buy that and keep it as a public use trail, but it fell apart. And I just discovered that lately. I got the legislation and the maps to go with it. So there, the first relief reenactment, February 14th. I've already got that approved by Angelo, and then I told you about you've gotten the Peter Meyerhoff piece that tells you a little more about how important the Johnson Ranch was. What's next? This is the end of it. This is what we still got to do. We have to get T-Post 71, the form signed and planted. Approve the interpretive panels and get money to purchase and place them if we get the approval. Get the obelisk panels replaced. Wheatland Historical Society needs to plan for hosted tours in April and May every year. One of the things, we're working with National Park Service, Tocopoulos Corporation, and ourselves, and trying to get a buy-off on how the public can gain access out there. They don't want the public getting in the way of their ranching activities, and they want it controlled. And what we've done so far has met their needs. When Octa comes out and we do those metal detecting projects, it's all under guided. We lead them out and we lead them back, lock the gate, everything's, and nobody's out wandering around on their own. Nothing's disappeared, and they had no problem. So so far they seem to be good with the Wheatland Historical Society, maybe twice in the spring, taking small groups out there and showing them some of the sites. Secure the historic sites and trail for the future. What are we going to do? How are we going to secure them? Clean up the well area. Francisco said if we take the barbed wire fence out of the middle of the berry bushes, he will use his farm folks and his machinery to clean out the berry bushes and make that in. It's a really nice shaded area with oaks and cottonwoods. It's a beautiful shaded area. Confirm alternate trails between the camp and Johnson Ranch. Obtain digital copy of the Duane painting for the museum or something like the original. Find evidence of the Camp Far West location. Work with the lobbyists on funding for the road and parking lot. Secure some covered wagons for display, if anybody's got one. And start verifying the trail going east. And so, and this is my last slide. When I finished the Oregon Trail, I didn't think about what it might be important at the time. What's missing on our trail? That not me, the sign. There is no end of the Truckee route. There is no historical Wheatland. I just give you that as a brain teaser to think about. Wouldn't it be nice if the traveling public in Wheatland somewhere there was a end of the trail, and there's not much to it. But it was kind of neat to stand there and have some information. So I just threw that in as the last slide. And I'll take any questions.
Where is that located?
Oregon City.
Okay.
I knew you'd ask me, Chris. There it is right there. See, historic Oregon City.
Okay.
We could have historical Wheatland.
There you go.
Want to put Wheatland on the map. That's my vision. So I'll take any questions. I don't know if I have any answers, but
You know, I have a comment. It's kind of ironic that a lot of the names that were mentioned today, they're names of people who were here when I was born, which was many birthday candidates.
yeah, me too.
And anyway, I used to take my classes out there.
Yeah, we envision school
I was
groups
teaching
going out
for-
there.
Well, I was teaching junior high history, and we'd go out there and we'd clean up, and I started with fourth graders out there too. And of course, fourth grade is the year where they start, when they really talk about the old history. But I don't know if they've done it so much.
She brings up a really good point. I was at in New Orleans at the World War II Museum, and I took a private tour with the curator and with a couple friends of mine. You get to go in the behind the scenes stuff. And I said, how do you get people to come to museums? She goes, we've done a great deal of study in museums. If you don't bring them in with the kids, if parents don't bring them in, or school groups, they don't think about museums when they get older. So it's important to bring, even though they may seem bored and not totally. Yeah, so bring the kids in when they're young, and they'll stay with museums and studying history as they get older. So, anything else?
Can I just make a comment? I'm a city councilman in Wheatland, and the city manager was supposed to come today and then had a family thing that kind of got in the way, but he wanted me to tell everybody, or remind everybody, that we're coming up on the 150th anniversary of the incorporation of Wheatland, which will be in 2024. And we're planning a year-long kind of history celebration that year, so maybe we can tie in some of what you're doing with what we're doing and make it all.
Maybe we can work together and present
Yeah.
something to Angelo to allow us to do something out there.
Right.
That'd be great. Maybe a sign, huh?
Yeah.
Maybe. These are all the books. If here's sports. This guy is Edwin Bryant. He's a newspaper publisher, and he came out here and really detailed information. If you look through it. This is all the stuff about Derby. You've seen that one. Camp Far West, and Trails book, and then I call this the Bible. This is Stuart's book on the Donner Party. If you don't have a copy of this, you need to at least start there before you start reading some other ones. But George R. Stewart, and some of the stuff has changed since he wrote it because he was back in the 30s and 40s, but it's still a good book. And then the Master's Speed Morgan, she took my whole box, and she had all my books for almost a year. And when she was done, I went over to Sac State. I said, "We're meeting in the parking lot. I need my box back." So that was her master's thesis. Was my box of stuff. So. Anything else?
All right, it's a wrap.